Oakland, California, December 1964. The winter rain was coming down in heavy, relentless sheets, turning the cracked asphalt streets of Chinatown into slick mirrors of neon and shadow. Inside a small, windowless kung fu studio located above a bustling grocery store on Broadway, the air was thick with a different kind of moisture. It was the heavy, suffocating sweat of 11 men packed tightly into a space designed for half that number. The heavy wooden door was locked from the inside. The dusty window blinds were drawn shut. There was no electricity humming in the room. The only light came from a few cheap kerosene lanterns sitting on the floor, casting long, dancing shadows against the bare wooden wall. The room smelled of damp wool, old liniment, and the faint, lingering scent of jasmine tea from the morning classes. This was not a tournament. There were no referees, no scorecard, no ringside physician, and no trophy. This was a trial by combat, an underground arbitration of honor, tradition, and the future of martial arts in America. And sitting quietly in the corner of the room, his legs crossed, his hands resting lightly on his knees, was Bruce Lee. He was 24 years old. He was fast, vocal, undeniably talented, and deeply arrogant. He had spent the last 2 years in Oakland building his entire identity around being a rebel, a modern pioneer willing to break the most sacred, unwritten rule of the insular Chinese martial arts world. He was openly teaching kung fu to Caucasians. The traditionalist establishment in San Francisco's Chinatown had drawn a hard line. They viewed Bruce as a traitor, a dangerous young man prostituting sacred ancient knowledge to foreign outsiders for $30 a month. They had issued a formal, severe decree: close the school immediately, stop teaching non-Chinese students, or face the violent consequences. Bruce, whose ego was as sharp and lethal as his straight punches, didn't just refuse. He openly mocked them and dared them to send their absolute best to shut him down. They sent Wong Jack Man. Wong Jack Man was everything Bruce Lee was not. He was soft-spoken, slender, and deeply, fundamentally traditional. He was a highly respected master of Northern Shaolin and Tai Chi, a man who believed in the absolute purity of ancient forms, the sacred geometry of classical stances. He had traveled from San Francisco to Oakland, not out of personal hatred, but out of a rigid sense of duty. He was the chosen instrument of the old guard, sent to publicly humiliate the young rebel, prove the superiority of classical methods, and shut his doors forever. The stakes were absolute. If Bruce lost this fight, his school would close, his reputation would be destroyed, and his life in America as an independent martial arts instructor would collapse entirely. The 11 witnesses, close students, local martial artists, and a few silent elders, formed a tight, nervous circle around the empty floor. The room fell into a suffocating, electric silence. Bruce stood up slowly, rolling his shoulders, popping his neck. He was confident. He had survived brutal street gang fights in Hong Kong. He had dismantled dozens of opponents on the rooftops using Wing Chun, the highly efficient, close-quarters combat system he had mastered under the legendary Ip Man. He genuinely believed his blinding speed and direct, linear aggression would overwhelm the traditionalist in a matter of seconds. Wong Jack Man stepped into the makeshift circle. He didn't look aggressive. He assumed a classical Northern Shaolin horse stance, his weight sunk incredibly low, his spine perfectly straight, his hands open, relaxed, and resting lightly at his sides. To the untrained eye, he looked like a statue, a scholar posing for a photograph, utterly rooted to the wooden floor. They bowed. The fight began. Bruce attacked first, exactly as he always did. He surged forward with explosive speed, launching a blistering chain of straight punches, the absolute hallmark of Wing Chun. His hands were blurs, snapping forward like steel pistons, aimed directly at Wong's center line. He expected the traditionalist to crumble, to cover up in fear, to be washed away by the sheer, overwhelming volume of strikes. It didn't happen. When Bruce's fists arrived at their intended target, Wong Jack Man simply wasn't there. He yielded. Instead of meeting force with force, instead of blocking the incoming strikes, he melted away from them. He used subtle, almost invisible shifts of his waist, soft circular parries, and delicate footwork that defied Bruce's linear, aggressive geometry. It was like punching deep water. Bruce's knuckles sliced through the empty air, where Wong's chest had been a millisecond prior. The traditionalist redirected Bruce's violent energy, absorbing the shockwave and slipping away to the side, maintaining a perfect, serene distance without taking a single point of damage. Bruce paused for a fraction of a second, his dark eyes narrowing. He attacked again, this time adding sharp, low kicks to the equation, trying to disrupt the man's base. The small studio echoed with the dull, heavy thud of Bruce's feet hitting the wooden floor. But Wong Jack Man was a ghost. He flowed around the kicks, his deep Tai Chi roots allowing him to absorb, deflect, and redirect the aggressive energy without ever losing his own balance. 2 minutes passed, then 3. The 11 witnesses watched in stunned, breathless silence. They had fully expected a one-sided slaughter. Instead, they were watching a masterclass in absolute frustration. Bruce Lee, the man who openly boasted he could knock any man out with 3 punches, was being completely, effortlessly neutralized. Not by superior strength, not by faster hands, but by absolute maddening softness. And then, a critical psychological shift occurred inside Bruce Lee's mind. As the fight dragged painfully into the 4th and 5th minutes, the physical reality of the situation began to aggressively override his massive ego. Bruce was incredibly fast, but explosive speed requires massive amounts of anaerobic energy. Chasing a phantom who absolutely refuses to stand still and exchange blows is physically exhausting. Bruce began to breathe harder, his chest heaved, the muscles in his shoulders and back, tense from the rigid classical Wing Chun structure he was strictly maintaining, began to burn with intense lactic acid. He realized, with a sudden cold clarity that hit him like a devastating physical blow to the stomach, that his art was fundamentally failing him. Wing Chun was designed for close-quarters combat, for trapping hands and relentless, overwhelming forward pressure. But Wong Jack Man completely refused to engage in Bruce's preferred range. The traditionalist was fighting a different fight entirely, a fight of fluid angles, endless circles, and pure evasion. Bruce's straight lines were absolutely useless against a man who simply wasn't there when the strike arrived. For the first time in his entire combat life, Bruce Lee felt the severe, terrifying limitations of his own beloved style. He felt like a man trying to cut down a weeping willow tree with a razor-sharp sword. Every strike just bent the tree, and the tree instantly snapped back into place. The realization bred a dark, uncharacteristic anger. Bruce dropped the classical stances entirely. He stopped trying to score technical points and decided to physically destroy the man. He charged forward, completely abandoning technique for raw, animalistic aggression. He tackled Wong Jack Man around the waist, driving him backward with all his weight. They crashed heavily onto the hard wooden floor. The grace, the geometry, the beauty of martial arts vanished in an instant, replaced by the ugly, desperate, sweating reality of a brutal street fight. Bruce rained down wild strikes, trying to pin the traditionalist to the floor, trying to inflict the severe damage his refined kung fu could not. It was brutal, it was messy, it was unrefined, and according to the varying accounts of the 11 witnesses, it lasted what felt like an eternity. Estimates range from 3 to 8 agonizing minutes of chaotic, slipping, grappling, and struggling on the floor. The elegant martial arts duel had devolved into a sweaty, desperate scramble. Eventually, Bruce managed to gain a dominant position, possibly securing a headlock or achieving full mount. Wong Jack Man, recognizing that the fight had completely devolved into a pure brawl, where his softness and evasions were entirely ineffective against Bruce's superior physical weight and grappling intensity, yielded. He tapped the wooden floor with his hand or verbally conceded the fight to stop the chaos. The fight was officially over. Bruce Lee stood up slowly, his chest heaving violently. sweat dripping from his nose and chin onto the wooden floor. He had won. Wong Jack Man had conceded. But the room did not erupt in celebration. The 11 witnesses looked at Bruce not with awe, but with a quiet, deeply uncomfortable realization. Bruce had won the physical match, but he had lost the myth. The invincible, untouchable speed of Bruce Lee had just spent 8 chaotic minutes chasing a slender, traditionalist scholar around a small, locked room. He hadn't knocked him out gracefully. He hadn't dismantled him with his famed 1-inch punch. He had gotten visibly angry, physically exhausted, and had to resort to a sloppy street fight just to win. The witnesses left quietly, murmuring amongst themselves. Wong Jack Man bowed respectfully to his opponent and departed into the rainy night, his personal dignity intact, having successfully proven that classical arts possessed deep, effective survival mechanisms against modern aggression. When the heavy door finally closed, Bruce Lee was left completely alone in the dark, kerosene-lit room. He didn't feel like a victorious warrior. He felt utterly exposed. He looked down at his own hands, still trembling slightly from the massive adrenaline dump and physical exhaustion. The victory tasted like bitter ash in his mouth. He replayed the fight in his mind, frame by agonizing frame. He realized that if Wong Jack Man, a slender traditionalist who didn't even want to be there, who actively tried to avoid violence, could survive his flawless Wing Chun for that long, what would happen if he fought a massive, heavily conditioned Western boxer? What if he fought a skilled wrestler? What if he fought a man who didn't yield and slip away, but charged directly back at him with equal, unrelenting savagery? The truth was a devastating psychological blow. His art was a cage. Wing Chun was beautiful, efficient, and deadly, but only against other classical Chinese stylists who played by the exact same rigid rule. Against a fluid opponent, against someone who refused to engage in his specific geometry, it was entirely rigid. It was a beautifully decorated prison of tradition. Bruce Lee spent the next 3 days in that locked studio, mostly alone. He didn't eat much. He didn't sleep well. He was in the midst of what philosophers call a dark night of the soul. He was aggressively deconstructing his entire identity. He had built his entire reputation, his entire sense of self, on being the fastest, the most efficient, the ultimate product of Chinese martial arts. And in 8 messy minutes, that carefully constructed identity had been violently shattered. He realized exactly why he wanted to hide this victory. He didn't want the world to know how painfully close he came to losing. He didn't want his devoted students to see the fatal flaws in his supposed invincibility. More importantly, he didn't want to lie to himself anymore. To speak of that fight publicly as a glorious, dominating victory would be to passively accept the severe limitations that Wong Jack Man had just exposed. So, Bruce Lee intentionally buried the fight. When asked about it in interviews later in life, he aggressively downplayed it, purposefully changed the details, or outright refused to comment. He didn't want to talk about Wong Jack Man. He wanted to completely destroy the limited version of Bruce Lee that had fought him that night. Out of that crushing, humiliating failure of a victory, Jeet Kune Do was born. Bruce Lee began to violently strip away the classical mess. He permanently abandoned the rigid-rooted stances of Wing Chun. He discarded the idea of set forms, or katas, famously calling them organized despair. He studied Western fencing, taking the fluidity of the lunge, the beat, and the deceptive timing. He studied Western boxing, adopting the economical footwork and the non-telegraphic punching mechanics. He avidly studied physics, biomechanics, and philosophy. He stopped being a Chinese martial artist and became a universal student of human movement. He realized that ultimate truth is not found in one specific style, but in the total absence of style. He coined the phrase that would change martial arts forever: absorb what is useful, discard what is not, add what is uniquely your own. The secret fight with Wong Jack Man on that rainy December night in 1964 was not a triumphant victory. It was a painful, necessary amputation. Bruce Lee had to willingly kill his own ego, kill his reliance on ancient tradition, and kill the classical structures that had initially made him great, but would ultimately restrict his limitless potential. He had to become formless, like water. The 11 witnesses didn't just watch a duel, they silently witnessed the agonizing death of classical martial arts and the violent, messy birth of modern mixed combat. They watched a young man realize in real time that tradition is a compass, not a final destination. Bruce Lee won the legal right to keep his school open that night, but he lost his comfort zone forever. He could no longer hide behind the safety of ancient forms. He spent the rest of his short, brilliant life trying to perfect the brutal lesson he learned in those 8 agonizing minutes. Just the secret of the 1964 duel isn't about who hit whom or who tapped out. The secret is the profound, terrifying realization that mastery is a constant illusion, and that true growth only begins when you are willing to accept that everything you know might be completely wrong. Bruce Lee chose the fire.